I am Nia. I am 32 years old. They say your wedding day is supposed to be the most magical moment of your life, but as I walked down the long, velvet-lined aisle of the largest megachurch in Atlanta, my fairy tale felt more like a crime scene. I was wearing a custom $20,000 silk gown hand-stitched with imported lace, but the only thing the 500 guests could stare at was the swollen, dark purple bruise covering my left eye. The sanctuary was dead silent, save for the collective gasp that rippled through the pews as my father handed me off at the altar. My fiance, Marcus, stood across from me. At 35, he was the golden boy of the city commercial real estate scene. A proud Morehouse graduate from a family with deep pockets and even deeper political connections. He stood there in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, radiating an arrogance that made my stomach turn. He did not look ashamed. He did not look apologetic. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath warm and aggressive against my cheek, smiled perfectly for the cameras, and whispered that I needed to learn a lesson. Then he looked down at the front pew where my mother Vivian sat perfectly composed in her designer suit. He gave her a subtle nod, and to my absolute horror, my own mother nodded back in approval. Some guests in the front rows saw this exchange and quickly looked away, choosing to ignore the violence staring them right in the face. I said nothing and let the ceremony continue. But right before we exchanged our vows, I did something that shattered their perfect illusion forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn down a toxic family dynamic to build your own empire. To understand the sweet taste of what I was about to do, you need to understand the suffocating world I grew up in. My mother Vivian had spent my entire life reminding me that I was the ultimate disappointment of the Washington family. We were part of the black elite in Atlanta, a world where social standing, country club memberships, and appearances meant everything. My sister Chloe was the golden child, perfectly molding herself into the high society image my mother demanded. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep. I preferred writing code-building software and staying out of the spotlight. I never cared for the galas or the gossip. To my mother, my independence was a disease, and Marcus was the cure. She believed that marrying a wealthy, prominent man would finally fix me. When I showed up to the bridal suite that morning with blood on my lip and a swollen eye, my mother did not ask if I was safe. She did not offer me a hug or tell me we needed to call the police. She simply locked the door, handed me a bottle of heavy coverage foundation, and told me that a battered daughter married to a wealthy man was a far better accessory than a single woman who dared to have a mind of her own. She told me to dry my tears and walk down that aisle because the Washington family reputation was more important than my safety. She thought she had broken my spirit. Marcus thought he had broken my will. They both severely underestimated me. Standing at the altar, the air inside the sanctuary was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive perfume. The politicians, business moguls, and elite social circles my family fought so desperately to impress were all staring at me. The pastor cleared his throat, stepping up to the microphone. His voice echoed through the massive speakers, asking the congregation to bow their heads in a moment of prayer before we exchanged our sacred vows. The silence in the megachurch was sudden and heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was completely still. I did not cry. I did not shake. I had spent the last 12 hours planning the exact sequence of events that was about to unfold, calculating every single move to absolute perfection. While Marcus and my mother thought I was crying in my room last night, I was actually setting a trap they would never be able to escape. I lifted my head and looked straight past Marcus, completely ignoring his arrogant smirk. My eyes scanned the vast room, looking over the sea of designer hats and tailored suits, until I found the audiovisual technician sitting in the glass booth at the very back of the balcony. We locked eyes, and I gave a slow, deliberate nod. The pastor opened his mouth to begin the traditional reading of the vows, but the massive digital screens flanking the altar suddenly flickered to life. A confused murmur swept through the crowd. I am sure everyone in the pews expected to see a romantic video montage to distract from the awkward tension in the room. Perhaps a slideshow of our engagement trip to Martha Vineyard, or perfectly curated photos of a happy couple set to a slow, soulful song. My mother sat up straighter, adjusting her pearls, ready to smile at the screen. Instead, the screens displayed a harsh black and white security feed. A bold digital timestamp in the bottom right corner indicated the footage was from 10:30 the previous night. The romantic lighting in the church suddenly felt incredibly cold as the giant screens broadcasted raw, unedited security camera footage from Marcus' private office. The entire congregation fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in that massive room. On the giant screens, Marcus was pacing furiously around his heavy mahogany desk. Then the frame captured me walking into his office, holding a stack of legal documents. The guests in the front rows leaned forward, their mouths falling slightly open in shock as they realized what they were watching. It was not a memory of love. It was the prologue to a takedown. The crisp audio of the security footage cracked through the church speakers like a gunshot. On the giant screens hovering above us, the black and white image showed Marcus towering over me in his private office. His face, the exact same face that had just smiled warmly at the pastor, was twisted in raw, unhinged rage. He slammed a thick stack of papers onto his mahogany desk and screamed at me to sign them. I watched myself on the screen, calmly standing my ground, telling him I would never sign a blank guarantee to bail out his failing real estate developments. The microphone picked up his voice perfectly as he yelled that he owned me, that my company was his ticket out of bankruptcy. Then came the sound that made 500 high society guests gasp in unison. A sharp, sickening smack echoed through the sanctuary. The footage showed Marcus pulling his arm back and striking me across the face with so much force that I crashed hard onto the hardwood floor. In the pews, several women shrieked. Men shifted uncomfortably in their tailored suits. But the true horror, the absolute betrayal that I wanted every single person in Atlanta to witness, was just about to happen. The heavy office door on the screen swung open. My mother Vivian stepped into the frame. The entire congregation held its collective breath. They expected to see a mother rush to her daughter to scream at the man who had just assaulted her child. Instead, the screens showed Vivian casually closing the door behind her. She looked down at me, bleeding on the floor, then looked at Marcus and let out an exasperated sigh. Her voice, usually dripping with sweet southern charm, cut through the church speakers with icy precision. "Get up, Nia," she ordered, not even offering me a hand. "Go to the bathroom and fix your makeup right now." The Washington family does not accept canceled weddings, especially not from a failure like you. A collective wave of shock ripped through the church. I could hear people murmuring my mother's name in disbelief. But the video Vivian was not finished. She crossed her arms, staring down at my bruised face on the monitor. "It is an absolute blessing that a man of his stature is even willing to marry you." She spat, her words dripping with pure disdain. "You are lucky Marcus is taking you off my hands. Do not you dare ruin my reputation and embarrass me in front of my church over a little slap. Now dry your eyes and act like you belong in this family." That single minute of footage did what I could never do with words. It stripped away 32 years of my mother's flawless philanthropic facade. It showed the world exactly how she viewed me, not as a daughter, but as a defective piece of property. She was desperate to sell off to the highest bidder to maintain her precious social status. Every time she had praised my sister Chloe as the golden child, while ignoring my achievements, every time she had told me I was too difficult, too stubborn, too independent, it all culminated in her watching me bleed and only caring about her country club image. The digital screens faded to black, plunging the altar into a heavy, suffocating tension. The silence lasted for only a fraction of a second, before the sanctuary exploded into absolute chaos. The pristine, polite society of Atlanta unraveled before my eyes. People were shouting, pointing fingers, and whispering frantically. I turned my gaze from the blank screens to the front pew. My mother was sitting frozen, her perfect posture completely rigid, her face drained of all color. The women sitting next to her had physically leaned away, treating her like she was suddenly contagious. Then a guttural roar tore through the noise. Marcus had realized that his reputation, his career, and his entire future had just been publicly executed. His political connections and family money could never erase the high-definition proof of his violence. The panic in his eyes instantly morphed into violent primal rage. "You ruined me!" he screamed, the veins in his neck bulging against his crisp tuxedo collar. He completely forgot where he was. He forgot the pastor, the guests, and the cameras. He lunged at me, throwing his entire body weight forward, his hands reaching directly for my throat to choke the life out of me right there on the holy altar. I did not flinch. I did not even take a step back. Before Marcus could close the 2 feet between us, the heavy velvet curtains behind the choir loft violently ripped open. 2 massive, towering bodyguards in sharp black suits exploded onto the altar. They moved with terrifying speed. The first bodyguard hit Marcus square in the chest, stopping his momentum instantly, while the second grabbed his shoulders and swept his legs out from under him. The sickening thud of Marcus hitting the solid marble floor echoed louder than his screams. The bodyguards pinned him face down, pressing their knees into his back and twisting his arms behind him in a brutal, unbreakable hold. Marcus thrashed wildly against the cold stone, cursing and spitting, but he was completely immobilized. I stood above him, looking down at the man who thought he could buy my submission, my face perfectly calm as he writhed in the dust of his own making. The entire sanctuary erupted into a deafening roar of overlapping screams and frantic gasps. Women in custom fascinators gripped their pearls, while men in sharp suits scrambled backward in their pews, as if the altar had suddenly caught fire. The illusion of the untouchable Washington family was officially in ruins, and the stench of our dirty laundry was suffocating the room. Beneath the heavy knees of my private security, Marcus continued to thrash. He spat out vicious curses, his face pressed hard against the cold, unforgiving marble. He demanded to be released, but my men did not move a single muscle. They were paid exceptionally well to follow my orders, and mine alone. Before I could even take a breath to savor the moment, the sharp clatter of designer heels echoed up the marble steps. It was Chloe, my older sister, and the undisputed golden child of the Washington family. She hiked up her extravagant silk maid of honor gown, sprinting toward the altar with a look of absolute horror on her flawless face. She was a renowned pediatrician who had built her entire identity on being perfect, but right now she looked completely unhinged. Right behind her was her husband, Trent. Trent was 36 years old, a Wall Street finance executive who had married into our black elite family, but always treated us like we were some sort of charity case. He was gracing with his presence. He was a white man who wore his privilege like a weapon, constantly parading his corporate superiority at our family dinners. He loved to speak down to me, treating my tech company like a cute little hobby while he moved imaginary money around on a trading floor. Today, he wore a bespoke silver suit that probably cost more than a luxury car, and his face was red with unearned authority. Chloe reached me first. She shoved her way past the pastor, who was frozen in shock, clutching his Bible to his chest. She did not look at my bruised face. She did not look at the giant screens that had just broadcasted my brutal assault. She only looked at the guests. She only cared about the catastrophic damage to her perfect social standing. "You are completely out of your mind, Nia," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You have always been insanely jealous of my perfect life, and now you have to destroy your own wedding just to get some sick attention. You are a sociopath. You are humiliating mother in front of the governor, the mayor, and half the city council. How could you do this to us?" She reached out as if to grab my shoulders and shake me, but my icy glare stopped her dead in her tracks. My absolute stillness seemed to infuriate her even more. She turned to her husband, tears of profound embarrassment streaming down her face, demanding that he fix this disaster immediately. She needed her white knight to swoop in and silence her difficult sister. Trent did not hesitate to play the savior. He stepped squarely in front of Chloe, puffing out his chest and using his booming corporate voice, the one he reserved for intimidating junior analysts and waitstaff. He stepped into my personal space, trying to tower over me. He pointed a manicured finger, stopping just an inch from my nose. "You are an absolute lunatic." "Nia?" He barked, his face contorted with rage. You are single-handedly destroying the reputation of this entire family over a minor domestic dispute. You think you are so clever with your little computer tricks, but this is the real world. You are playing a very dangerous game with very powerful people, and you are going to lose everything. I looked at his finger hovering near my face, and then I looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not step back. I let the heavy silence stretch, forcing him to fill the void with his arrogant threats. Tell your hired thugs to let Marcus go right this second. Trent demanded, his voice echoing through the hidden microphone clipped to my wedding dress. He looked down at the two massive bodyguards, fully expecting them to instantly obey a finance executive barking orders in a southern megachurch. When my men did not even flinch or acknowledge his existence, Trent turned a deep mottled shade of purple. I swear to God, Nia, if you do not tell them to stand down right now, I am calling the police. He threatened, pulling a sleek, gold smartphone from the inner pocket of his jacket. I will have you thrown in a jail cell for defamation, for assault, and for corporate espionage. I have the most expensive lawyers in Atlanta on retainer, and I will personally see to it that your pathetic little IT company is sued into absolute oblivion. You will be bankrupt and sitting behind bars before midnight. The sheer arrogance of his words hung heavily in the dead air of the sanctuary. The congregation watched in stunned fascination as he stood there holding his phone like a loaded weapon. He fully believed he was the savior of the Washington family name. He thought his money, his gender, and his unearned confidence gave him the ultimate authority to command the room and silence the abused sister. He expected me to crumble under his booming voice. He expected me to cry or to beg for his forgiveness and beg for mercy. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the slow, calculating smile of a woman who had already won the war before the opposing general even realized the battle had begun. I lifted my hands perfectly steady and slowly adjusted the diamond tiara resting on my hair, making sure it sat perfectly straight against my veil. I smoothed out the front of my heavy silk wedding gown, took a deep, steadying breath, and leaned slightly toward him. There is absolutely no need for you to make that call, Trent, I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm, echoing crystal clear over the hushed congregation. You can put your phone away. Trent scoffed, a smug look of victory immediately washing over his face. He actually thought I was backing down. He thought I was terrified of his legal threats and his financial power. See, Chloe, he muttered over his shoulder to my sister. She is all bark and no bite. I kept my eyes locked on his, watching the false confidence radiate from his posture. I let him enjoy his imaginary victory for exactly 3 seconds before I pulled the rug out from under him and obliterated his entire reality. You do not need to call them, I continued, my voice slicing through his arrogance like a freshly sharpened blade, because the police are already standing at the front doors of the church. But let me assure you, Trent, they are definitely not here to arrest me. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary swung open with a resounding crash. 6 uniformed Atlanta police officers marched down the center aisle, their heavy boots echoing against the marble floor. The congregation parted like the Red Sea, falling into a stunned, breathless silence. Trent actually smiled. His chest puffed out even further, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he had just won. He lowered his smartphone and gave me a condescending nod, fully believing that my rebellion was over. My mother, Vivian, practically leaped from the front pew. The color returned to her face as she saw her salvation approaching in blue uniforms. She immediately turned on the waterworks, producing theatrical tears that would have won her an Oscar. "Officer, thank God you are here," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "You need to arrest my daughter immediately. She has had a complete mental breakdown. She is delusional, violent, and she hired these thugs to attack her fiance at the altar. Please cuff her before she hurts anyone else." The lead detective, a tall man with a stern expression and graying temples, did not even break his stride. He walked right past my mother, completely ignoring her hysterical performance. He marched up the altar steps, stepped right around me, and looked down at Marcus, who was still pinned to the floor by my security team. The detective gave my men a brief nod. "Let him up," he ordered. The bodyguards hauled Marcus to his feet, keeping a firm grip on his arms. Marcus adjusted his tuxedo jacket, trying to muster whatever shred of dignity he had left. "Detective, I am Marcus Washington. My father is Senator Washington. This is a massive misunderstanding caused by a hysterical woman." But the detective was already pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Marcus Washington, you are under arrest for felony domestic battery and aggravated assault," the detective announced, his voice booming through the silent church. "You have the right to remain silent." Marcus went completely rigid. The color drained from his face as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. "You cannot do this," he stammered, panic finally replacing his arrogance. "This is a private matter. There is no police report." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, until I was looking directly into his terrified eyes. "There is a report," Marcus Y said softly but loud enough for the microphone to catch every syllable. "I filed it at 3 o'clock this morning. I sent the unedited security footage directly to the chief of police along with the medical records from the hospital visit I had to make last night. And just to be completely certain, nothing was swept under the rug by your father and his political friends. I also sent the file to every major news outlet in the state. By the time you reach the precinct, your face will be on every television screen in Atlanta." The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and for a second, the golden boy of Atlanta real estate looked like a terrified, helpless child. The officers grabbed him by the arms and began marching him down the aisle. The same aisle I was supposed to walk down as his submissive, battered wife. Instead, he was being paraded in handcuffs past his business partners, his politician friends, and his country club peers. He shouted curses at me, threatening to ruin my life, but his words were drowned out by the frantic whispers of the 500 guests who were already pulling out their phones to check the news. As the church doors closed behind Marcus and the police, the reality of the situation settled over the altar. Chloe was openly weeping, her perfectly contoured makeup ruined, clinging to Trent's arm as if the world was ending. Trent, however, quickly composed himself. He adjusted his expensive silver tie, cleared his throat, and looked at me with a sneer of absolute disgust. He was desperate to distance himself from the toxic fallout that was about to obliterate the Washington family name. "You really think you did something profound today?" Nia, Trent scoffed, shaking his head. "All you did was embarrass yourself and ruin a perfectly good Saturday. Marcus was a fool for getting caught, but you are an even bigger fool for destroying your only chance at a decent life. You are just a bitter, lonely IT worker who had to burn down a church to feel important. But none of this touches me or my wife. We are leaving." I watched him turn his back on me, his arrogance completely untouched by the carnage around him. I let him take exactly 2 steps before I spoke. I smiled a genuine cold smile and adjusted my tiara one last time. "Enjoy that custom Zegna suit, Trent," I said, my voice dripping with lethal sweetness. "Because it is the nicest thing you will be wearing before you trade it for an orange prison jumpsuit." The color completely drained from Trent's face. His arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice losing its booming authoritative edge. "Stop playing games, Nia. You do not know the first thing about high-level finance. You are a glorified bookkeeper." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The heavy silk of my gown rustled against the floor, sounding like a drawn sword in the quiet room. "I am not an accountant, Trent," I said softly, my eyes locking onto his. "I never was. I am a software engineer. And for the last 5 years, I have been building predictive algorithmic models for institutional trading." Trent scoffed, trying to mask his growing unease with a forced barking laugh. "So what? You wrote a cute little program. That does not change the fact that I control billions of dollars in assets. You are nothing to me." I tilted my phone screen so he could see it. It was not a simple accounting app, it was a live top-tier encrypted dashboard showing massive catastrophic liquidations. Trent, I said, keeping my tone terrifyingly polite. Did you really think Marcus was marrying me because he liked my personality? He was bankrupt. His real estate empire was drowning in toxic debt, and he needed a massive injection of untraceable capital to save his own skin. He found out about my company. He found out what it was truly worth. My mother stepped forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. Vivian had no idea what I was talking about. She only understood country club dues and designer labels. What nonsense is this, she demanded. Marcus comes from old money. He is wealthy. He does not need anything from you. He needed everything from me, mother, I shot back, not breaking eye contact with Trent. Because 3 weeks ago my tech firm was quietly acquired by a global financial conglomerate. For $300 million. Chloe actually gasped, her hands dropping from her face. Vivian stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the velvet armchair as if I had physically struck her. 300 million, Vivian whispered the number, rendering her entirely breathless. But Trent was not looking at Vivian or Chloe. He was staring at the screen of my phone, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. He recognized the specific ticker symbols flashing red on my dashboard. He recognized the exact holding accounts that were currently bleeding out. You see, Trent? I continued, my voice steady and merciless. When Marcus realized I would not willingly sign over my company to save his failing developments, he got desperate. He reached out to his good friend, a brilliant Wall Street executive, to help him set up a series of highly leveraged, extremely illegal shell corporations. The plan was to siphon my company's assets immediately after the wedding, using my signature on those blank guarantee forms he tried to beat out of me last night. Trent was physically shaking now. His perfectly tailored Zegna suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. How do you know about that? He whispered, the confident corporate titan completely vanishing before my eyes. Because I built the security architecture you tried to bypass, I replied. Stepping so close I could smell the expensive cologne and cold sweat radiating off his skin. You thought you were hacking a simple accounting firm. You did not realize you were stepping into a digital bear trap. I have been tracking your illegal transfers for the last 3 months, Trent. Every shell company, every offshore account, every single dime you embezzled from your own clients to help Marcus cover his tracks. Trent opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man standing on the tracks watching a freight train bear down on him. And that phone call you were just threatening to make? I asked, gesturing to the sleek gold smartphone he was still gripping in his hand. You might want to hold off on that. Because while you were standing at the altar threatening to freeze my non-existent lease, my automated security protocol was executing a complete data dump. Every illegal transaction, every forged document, and every piece of communication between you and Marcus was just sent directly to the SEC, the FBI, and the senior partners at your firm. No, Trent breathed, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. No, you cannot do this. You are lying. You are bluffing. Check your phone, Trent, I offered smoothly. He fumbled with his device, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped it. He unlocked the screen, and I watched his entire world collapse in real time. His inbox was flooded with urgent, frantic messages from his firm. Missed calls from his senior partners were stacking up by the second. An email from his compliance department sat at the very top, the subject line reading urgent, immediate suspension and investigation. Trent dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. He fell to his knees right there in the bridal suite, grabbing the edges of my silk gown, all traces of his white male privilege and corporate superiority entirely gone. Nia, please. He begged, tears streaming down his face, completely ignoring his wife, who was watching him in horrified silence. Please, you have to undo this. They will send me to federal prison. I will lose everything. Please, I will do anything. I am family. I looked down at him, feeling nothing but a profound, absolute emptiness. For 32 years, these people had treated me like dirt beneath their shoes. They had demanded my compliance, mocked my independence, and literally stood by while a man beat me, all in the name of preserving their precious status. I gently but firmly pulled my gown from his grasp and took a step back. You should have thought about family when you were helping a man try to steal my life, I said, my voice echoing coldly in the small room. I turned to the heavy oak doors, grabbed the brass handle, and looked back at my mother and sister one last time. They were standing frozen, looking at the crying man on the floor, their entire universe of wealth, status, and perfection lying in ruins around them. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. "Have a beautiful afternoon." I pulled the door open and walked out of the bridal suite, leaving the toxicity, the abuse, and the Washington family legacy burning in the ashes behind me. The silence following my words to Trent was thick and suffocating, but it only lasted for a heartbeat. A sudden piercing shriek shattered the quiet of the sanctuary. It was Chloe. Seeing her husband, the man who provided her with her lavish lifestyle and untouchable social status, reduced to a weeping, broken mess on the altar floor, was too much for her fragile ego to process. Her perfect, curated reality was disintegrating, and her immediate instinct was to destroy the person holding the mirror. She lunged at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She raised her hand, her manicured fingers curled into claws, aiming directly for the dark, swollen bruise that Marcus had left on my face the night before. But she never even came close. The second bodyguard, who had just finished watching the police drag Marcus out the heavy oak doors, moved with lightning speed. He stepped smoothly between us, catching Chloe by the wrists before she could land a single blow. He did not hurt her, but he held her in a grip of iron, creating an impenetrable wall of solid muscle between my sister and me. Chloe thrashed against him like a wild animal, her expensive silk gown tangling around her legs, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. "Let me go!" she screamed, struggling violently against the bodyguard. "You ruin everything, Nia. You have always been jealous of me. You are nothing but a pathetic, jealous piece of trash. You had to burn down your own wedding and ruin my husband because you cannot stand the fact that I am better than you. I am a successful doctor. I am a pillar of this community. And you are just a failure who had to invent some ridiculous lie about a tech company to get attention." I stood perfectly still, letting her scream until her voice grew hoarse. I looked at the congregation. The 500 guests were watching this spectacle with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Then I looked back at Chloe. I felt a strange, absolute calmness wash over me. For my entire life, I had swallowed my pride to protect her image. I had shrunk myself down so she could shine. That ended today. "A successful doctor," I repeated, my voice amplified by the microphone cutting cleanly through her hysterical sobbing. "Let us talk about that medical career of yours, Chloe. Let us talk about exactly how you became the golden child of the Washington family." My mother, Vivian, suddenly stood up from the front pew. Her face was chalk white. "Nia, stop this right now," she commanded, trying to use that old familiar tone of authority that had kept me in line for 3 decades. "Do not say another word. This is family business." I turned my gaze to Vivian, feeling the last remaining threads of my daughterly obligation snap and wither away. "Family business?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean like the family business we conducted in the kitchen when I was 18 years old?" I looked back at the crowd, then at Trent, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, staring up at us with a blank, shell-shocked expression. "I want you all to know exactly what kind of doctor my sister is," I announced, my voice ringing out across the vast room. When we were teenagers, our grandfather Theodore left a substantial college trust fund to be divided equally between Chloe and me. It was enough to pay for our entire higher education. But when Chloe got accepted into a prestigious, wildly expensive medical school, my half of the trust fund suddenly was not mine anymore. I looked directly at my mother. "Do you remember what you told me that night, Vivian?" You sat me down at the kitchen table, slid a legal waiver in front of me, and handed me a pen. You told me that I needed to drop out of my software engineering program. You said that Chloe was the smart one, the true investment, the golden child who was going to bring prestige to the Washington name. You told me that my dreams were a waste of time, and that my duty was to sacrifice my future to pay for my sister's tuition. A murmur of disgust rippled through the pews. I saw several of Vivian's country club friends leaning away from her, whispering behind their hands. Vivian sank back into the pew as if her legs could no longer support her. And I signed it. I continued, my voice steady though the memory still burned. I gave up my inheritance. I worked 3 awful jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, teaching myself how to code in a freezing studio apartment just to build my tech company from absolute scratch. I gave you everything, Chloe. I handed you a silver platter with your future on it. Chloe had stopped struggling against the bodyguard. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror. She knew exactly what was coming next. "And how did you repay this family for that massive sacrifice?" I asked, stepping closer to her. "How did you repay the sister who gave up her college fund for your prestige?" "Shut up," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "Nia, please shut up." "Tell your husband, Chloe," I demanded, my tone turning icy. "Tell Trent exactly what you do every day when you leave your penthouse in your designer scrubs. Because you certainly are not going to a hospital." Trent slowly pushed himself up off the marble floor. He looked at his wife, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Chloe," Trent asked, his voice rough, "what is she talking about? Where do you go every day?" Chloe could not look at him. She stared at the floor, tears of absolute panic spilling over her cheeks. "Since she seems to have lost her voice, I will tell you, Trent," I said smoothly. "Your perfect high society, brilliant doctor of a wife has not practiced medicine in 2 years." The gasp from the crowd was audible. Trent took a step toward Chloe, his mouth falling open. What he breathed. 2 years ago, I explained, making sure every single person in the room heard the truth. Chloe was involved in a massive case of medical malpractice. Gross negligence, to be exact. The hospital she worked for quietly settled the lawsuit out of court for millions of dollars to avoid a public relations nightmare. They covered it up beautifully, but the state medical board did not. They permanently revoked her license to practice medicine anywhere in this country. She is not a doctor. She is a fraud. "No," Trent whispered, shaking his head. "No, that is impossible. You leave the house every morning at 7. You have shifts. You have patients." "She goes to a luxury day spa in Buckhead, Trent," I replied, destroying the last illusion of his perfect marriage. "She sits by a pool, drinks mimosas, and shops online for 8 hours a day while pretending to be on call. She has been lying to you, to our mother, and to everyone in this church for 24 months because her ego could not handle the fact that the golden child is an unlicensed, disgraced failure." Trent stared at Chloe. The absolute betrayal on his face was almost tragic. He had built his entire arrogant identity on having the perfect, wealthy, highly educated trophy wife. He had looked down on me for years, treating me like peasant-class garbage, all while his own wife was living a total lie funded by his soon-to-be frozen bank accounts. "Chloe," Trent asked again, his voice cracking. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me right now." But Chloe just sobbed, burying her face in her hands, entirely unable to defend herself. Vivian sat in the front pew, completely paralyzed. Her mouth was open, her eyes darting between me and her precious golden child. The perfect Washington family matriarch had just discovered that her greatest investment was a total sham, and that the daughter she threw away was a multimillionaire. I stood at the altar, surrounded by the ruins of their reputations. The heavy, expensive scent of the imported white roses now felt like the smell of victory. I looked at the 3 of them, my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law, and felt the final chains of their toxic expectations fall away. I had barely made it 2 steps into the cavernous marble corridor of the church when a hand violently seized my shoulder. I was jerked backward with a force that sent a sharp jolt of pain down my spine. Before I could even turn to face my attacker, the sharp, stinging crack of a hand striking my face echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My head snapped to the side. The taste of copper flooded my mouth as my teeth cut into the soft tissue of my inner lip. I slowly raised my hand to my stinging cheek, turning my gaze to see my mother Vivian standing over me. Her chest was heaving, her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes were wild with a feral, unhinged desperation. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had happened inside the sanctuary. My security guards immediately surged forward, their hands reaching for their weapons, but I raised a single hand, stopping them in their tracks. I wanted to hear this. I needed to see exactly how far my mother was willing to go to defend a lie. Vivian did not look back into the bridal suite where Chloe was still sobbing hysterically on the floor. She did not express a single ounce of disappointment that her golden child, the supposed pillar of the community, was a disgraced fraud. Instead, all of her venom, all of her towering rage was directed entirely at me. "How dare you!" Vivian hissed, her voice vibrating with a venomous fury that made her entire body shake. "How dare you speak to your sister that way? Chloe made a mistake. She is under an immense amount of pressure, the kind of pressure a nobody like you could never possibly understand. She is a victim of a broken medical system, and you are using her pain to make yourself look like some kind of hero. You are tearing this family apart." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. A mistake. Chloe had committed gross medical negligence. She had put lives at risk. She had lied to everyone for 2 years, sipping mimosas by a resort pool while pretending to save lives. Yet in Vivian's twisted status, obsessed reality, Chloe was the innocent victim. And I, the daughter who had just been beaten by her fiance and had to orchestrate her own rescue from a violent sociopath, was the villain. It was a stunning display of maternal delusion. But Vivian was not finished. Her carefully crafted mask of Southern elegance had completely melted away, revealing the terrified, greedy woman underneath. She closed the distance between us, invading my personal space. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat!" Vivian shrieked, stepping forward and jabbing a manicured finger hard into my collarbone. "You have no idea what you have just done. You think you are so clever with your little algorithms and your secret money. You think you won today. But you are destroying the very foundation of this family. We needed this wedding. We needed Marcus. Needed him for what I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. To beat me. To use my company as a slush fund for his failing real estate empire. To save us." Vivian screamed the truth, finally tearing its way out of her throat with a ragged, desperate sound. "Trent is ruined. His investment fund is completely underwater. He made terrible trades and his clients are demanding their money back immediately. We are facing total bankruptcy, Nia. We are going to lose the estate, the luxury cars, the country club memberships. We are going to lose everything." But Marcus had a solution. Marcus was going to wire $5 million into Trent's offshore accounts the very moment the ink dried on your marriage certificate. $5 million to save this family from absolute ruin. And all you had to do was smile, put on the ring, and be a good, obedient wife. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs, leaving me feeling entirely hollow. I looked past Vivian, peering back into the open doorway of the bridal suite. Trent had stopped crying. He was sitting slumped against the wall, looking at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Chloe was staring blankly ahead, her face streaked with mascara. They all knew. Every single one of them knew. Suddenly, the last 6 months of my life flashed before my eyes, bringing a sickening clarity to every strange interaction. I remembered the sudden, intense pressure from my mother to date Marcus, a man I had initially rejected. I remembered the way Trent, who usually ignored my existence entirely, suddenly took an active interest in my love life, pushing Marcus and me together at every family dinner and holiday gathering. I remembered the way they all conveniently looked the other way when Marcus grabbed my arm too hard in public, or when he spoke to me like I was a piece of property he had just purchased. The most horrifying memory surfaced from just 12 hours ago. Last night, when I showed up at my parents' house with a bruised face and a split lip, begging for help, begging to cancel the wedding. Vivian had not acted surprised. She had calmly handed me an ice pack and told me that all couples have disagreements. She had told me to cover the bruise with heavy foundation and remember my duty to the family. She knew what Marcus was. She knew he was a violent, abusive monster. But she did not care. None of them cared. They had orchestrated this entire marriage from the very beginning. They had actively conspired to trap me in a life of domestic terror, all to secure a $5 million payout. They needed that money to save Trent's massive fragile ego and my mother's precious country club status. They were not just ignoring my abuse. They had auctioned me off to my abuser. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was staggering. It was a darkness so profound it left me temporarily breathless. I looked at Vivian, studying the desperate, greedy lines of her face. I looked at Trent, the arrogant finance executive who had just been exposed as a massive, pathetic failure. I looked at Chloe, the disgraced doctor who had eagerly participated in selling her own sister to maintain her luxury shopping habits. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not raise my hand to strike my mother back for the stinging slap she had just delivered. The time for tears and rage had long passed. Instead, a slow, absolute realization washed over me, settling deep into my bones and freezing the last remaining drop of love I held for these people. I tilted my head, looking at the woman I used to call my mother. A dark, bitter laugh escaped my lips. It started low, echoing in the quiet marble corridor, growing louder as the absolute absurdity of my entire existence fully settled in. $5 million, I said softly, the words dripping with a chilling, hollow amusement. I looked at my bruised reflection in the gilded mirror hanging on the corridor wall, touching the swelling mark on my cheek before turning my gaze back to Vivian. After all the sacrifices I made for this family, I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. After giving up my college inheritance so Chloe could go to medical school. After working myself to the bone to build something real while you all played dress up and pretended to be royalty. You looked at my life, my safety, my future, and you put a price tag on it. I let the bitter smile reach my eyes, though there was absolutely no warmth behind it. I stared directly into Vivian's terrified, calculating eyes. So my price is $5 million. How cheap? The heavy silence that followed my words hung in the air of the sanctuary, thick and suffocating. The entire congregation watched with bated breath, their eyes darting between my bruised face and Trent's suddenly pale complexion. Trent, who had spent the last 5 years towering over me at every family dinner, who had constantly belittled my career as a minor hobby, now looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. His chest puffed out with arrogant authority, only moments ago deflated rapidly. He opened his mouth to speak, to deliver another booming corporate threat, but the words seemed to die in his throat. Without breaking eye contact with him, I turned my back on the altar and slowly walked toward the hidden side door that led to the private bridal suite. My movements were unhurried and precise. The heavy silk of my extravagant wedding gown rustled softly against the marble floor, the sound echoing clearly through the hushed church. I knew they would follow me. Their egos, their desperate need to control the narrative would not allow them to do anything else. As expected, I heard the frantic clicking of Chloe's heels and the heavy, hurried footsteps of Trent and Vivian trailing close behind me. The heavy wooden door of the bridal suite clicked shut, sealing the 4 of us inside the luxurious, flower-filled room. The sudden quiet was jarring, a sharp contrast to the chaotic sanctuary we had just left behind. I walked directly over to the ornate mahogany vanity table tucked into the corner of the room. Resting right where I had left it, hidden beneath a discarded lace veil, was a thick, crimson-red folder. I reached out and let my fingertips graze the smooth texture of the cardstock. The moment felt surreal. This single folder contained the absolute destruction of the Washington family's golden pedestal. I picked it up, feeling its heavy weight in my hands, and slowly turned to face them. A razor-sharp, calculating smirk stretched across my face. I did not try to hide the immense, overwhelming satisfaction bubbling up inside my chest. I tossed the heavy red folder onto the center of the vanity table. It landed with a sharp, definitive smack that made both my mother and sister physically flinch. Trent, my superior, brilliant white brother-in-law, I began, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost conversational tone that made his eyes widen with sudden panic. You have spent years parading your corporate pedigree around this family. You love to remind us how you graced our black elite circles with your Wall Street genius. You thought you were the smartest person in any room you walked into. But did you really think you could hide the fact that you have been using this megachurch's retirement fund as your own personal high-stakes casino? The blood completely drained from Trent's face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. His bespoke silver suit suddenly looked entirely too large for his shrinking frame. Chloe gasped, stepping away from her husband as if he had suddenly caught fire. "What are you talking about, Nia?" she demanded, her voice shrill with rising hysteria. "What retirement fund? Mint?" I kept my eyes locked entirely on Trent, watching the cold sweat break out across his forehead, gleaming under the bright vanity lights. I let him suffer in the silence for a few seconds before answering. "Your husband manages the pension and retirement accounts for this exact church, Chloe," I explained, my tone dripping with lethal sweetness. Over 10,000 congregants, hundreds of hardworking people, choir directors, janitors, teachers, all trusting Trent with their life savings. But Trent got a little too arrogant. He took $3 million of the community's money and dumped it into highly volatile, unregulated cryptocurrency investments because he thought he could beat the market. And when the market crashed, he lost every single penny. "That is a complete fabrication," Trent shouted, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. He lunged toward the vanity table, pointing a shaking finger at the red folder. "You have hacked my private servers. You are doctoring financial records to frame me because you are a bitter, jealous woman." I did not move an inch. I let him pace, watching him run his hands through his perfectly styled hair, destroying the expensive gel hold. "I did not have to hack anything, Trent," I countered smoothly. "You were incredibly, pathetically sloppy. When the crypto market wiped you out, you panicked. You tried to cover the massive gaping hole in your books by funneling the remaining church funds through a maze of dummy accounts. You set up a shell company in the Cayman Islands under your mother's maiden name, hoping to generate fake returns to trick your auditors." Trent's knees visibly buckled at the mention of his mother's maiden name. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a velvet armchair, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. "It is all in that red folder, Trent," I said, gesturing to the table. "The IP addresses the encrypted messages to your offshore broker, the digital receipts of the Ethereum transfers you tried to tumble through the dark web. There is even a copy of the desperate email you sent last Tuesday at 2 in the morning, begging your broker to reverse a massive margin call. You are a thief, Trent. But worse than that, you are an incredibly incompetent thief." Trent was hyperventilating now. Heavy drops of sweat rolled down his temples, soaking into the pristine, starched collar of his expensive dress shirt. He looked cornered, trapped like a rat in a maze of his own making. He looked at Vivian, then at Chloe, his eyes wide and pleading, desperately seeking an alliance. And like any cornered animal, he resorted to the most desperate, pathetic defense mechanism he possessed. He puffed out his chest, his face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. He squared his shoulders, attempting to summon a scrap of his former authority. "This is exactly what I expected from you people." Trent spat, his voice shaking with manufactured outrage. "I marry into this supposedly elite black family. I bring my expertise, my connections, my pedigree. And the second things get complicated, you turn on the white guy. This is a witch hunt. This is textbook reverse racism. You are targeting me because I am the outsider here, because I do not fit into your insular, prejudiced little Atlanta country club narrative." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words left the bridal suite in a state of suspended animation. Chloe stared at her husband, her jaw dropping open, her tear-streaked face a portrait of absolute disbelief. Even Vivian, a woman who worshipped Trent's proximity to whiteness and corporate power, looked physically sickened by his blatant, shameless attempt to play the victim. "Reverse racism?" I asked, tilting my head as I studied the pathetic, ruined man standing before me. A dark, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You embezzle $3 million from a black megachurch, you gamble away the life savings of elderly custodians and hardworking teachers, you try to sell your black sister-in-law to a violent abuser to cover your tracks, and your legal defense is that you are the victim of discrimination. You are twisting the facts to fit your narrative," Trent yelled, spittle flying from his lips. He was grasping at straws, his corporate armor completely shattered. I was managing risk. It is a complex institutional financial strategy. You are just a coder, Nia. You do not understand high-level asset management. I was going to replace the funds. The $5 million from Marcus was going to make the church whole, plus a substantial return on investment. I was saving them. You were saving yourself, I corrected him sharply, my voice cutting through his hysterical rationalizations like a scalpel. You were robbing Peter to pay Paul. And when Paul ran out of money, you decided to rob me. You sat at our family dinner table week after week drinking my father's expensive scotch, looking down your nose at me while knowing you were secretly bankrupt and facing federal wire fraud charges. I picked up the red folder and tossed it directly at his chest. It hit him and scattered across the floor glossy printouts of bank statements, encrypted emails and wire transfer logs fanning out over the carpet like a deck of losing cards. You can try to sell that reverse racism garbage to the judge, Trent, I said, staring him dead in the eye. Because the SEC and the FBI are currently raiding your firm's downtown office. They are confiscating your servers, your hard drives, and your personal ledgers as we speak. Trent dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over the scattered documents on the floor, his entire world crashing down around him in absolute ruin. I watched him for a long moment. Trent's manicured hands shook violently as he scrambled over the floor, frantically trying to gather the scattered pages. His eyes darted wildly across the highlighted lines of code, the offshore routing numbers, and the decrypted email transcripts. He was hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, panicked gasps that echoed in the stifling quiet of the bridal suite. The heavy, sickeningly sweet scent of the imported white roses seemed to suffocate the room, but my mind had never been clearer. I raised my hands and grasped the edge of the tight elbow-length white silk gloves my mother had forced me to wear. Slowly, deliberately, I began to peel the left one off. The delicate material clung to my skin, but I yanked it, letting the tiny pearl buttons snap and scatter across the marble floor. I dropped the ruined silk directly onto the pile of evidence Trent was desperately trying to shield. I repeated the process with the right glove, tossing it beside the first. My bare hands felt light, finally free from the costume they had shoved me into for this theatrical sacrifice. You never actually bothered to ask what my company did. Did you, Trent? I asked, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. For 5 years, you sat at the head of my parents' dining table, swirling your expensive scotch, making condescending jokes about my little computer hobby. You told everyone I was playing around with useless apps in a cramped studio while you were moving real capital. You called me a glorified low-level accountant just last Thanksgiving. Trent stopped scrambling. He remained on his knees, clutching a fistful of printed bank statements, and slowly looked up at me. The arrogant superior executive was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified, hollow-eyed ghost. If you had ever possessed an ounce of genuine curiosity, instead of blinding, pathetic arrogance, you might have done a simple background check on the firm I built. I continued, taking a slow step toward him. You would have discovered that my little tech company is a top-tier cybersecurity and forensic data analytics firm. We do not make apps, Trent. We track digital threats, trace laundered money, and expose complex corporate fraud for enterprise-level clients. We are the people companies call when they realize they are being robbed from the inside. I let the words hang in the air. Chloe let out a small, strangled gasp, pressing both hands over her mouth as she backed further into the wall. Her eyes were wide with a new dawning horror. She thought she had married a titan of industry. She was just now realizing she had married a common thief who was about to lose everything. 3 months ago, I said, maintaining my icy conversational tone, the elder board of this very church noticed some troubling discrepancies in their quarterly pension statements. The numbers were not aligning with the market reality. They were smart enough not to confront you directly. They knew if they tipped you off, you would destroy the evidence. Instead, they quietly contracted an outside firm to conduct a comprehensive invisible audit of your entire network architecture and financial routing. I tilted my head, looking down at his pathetic, trembling frame. They hired me. Trent dropped the papers. His hands fell limply to his sides. It was almost insulting how easy you made it, I told him, allowing a sharp, mocking smile to touch my lips. You genuinely thought you were a mastermind because you used a basic, commercially available VPN to mask your location when you logged into your Cayman Island shell accounts. You thought simply deleting your browser history erased your digital footprint. I spent 12 weeks inside your network, Trent. I watched you operate in real time. I tracked every single IP address you used to funnel the church's retirement funds into failing crypto exchanges. I mapped the entire web of dummy corporations you created to hide the massive losses. I recovered every single deleted email, every panicked message to your offshore brokers, and every single forged digital signature you used to authorize the illegal wire transfers. You left a trail so wide and so obvious a first-year coding student could have caught you. No, Trent whispered, his voice completely broken. No, you cannot have all of that. It was encrypted. It was hidden. Nothing is hidden from me, I replied, my voice dropping to a register of absolute freezing calm. And I did not just print these documents out today to make a dramatic scene at my wedding. I am a legally contracted forensic auditor reporting a major felony. Every unredacted server log, every transaction receipt, every forged signature, and the complete 200-page forensic analysis was securely transmitted to the white-collar crime division of the FBI yesterday morning. Trent let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. That is exactly why they are raiding your downtown office right now, I explained smoothly, destroying the very last shred of hope he had left. They are seizing your servers. They are confiscating your hard drives. They are freezing every single asset tied to your name, Chloe's name, and the offshore accounts you tried to hide under your mother's maiden name. You are done, Trent. There is no $5 million bailout that can save you from a federal indictment. The absolute reality of his destruction finally crushed him. The realization that there was no talking his way out of this, no corporate loophole, no reverse racism defense that could save him from irrefutable technological proof broke his mind. He let out a loud, pathetic wail, his shoulders shaking violently as he began to openly weep on the marble floor. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of mercy, any hint of the quiet, obedient sister-in-law he was used to bullying. But he found nothing. I was a stone wall. Realizing I was untouchable, his frantic, panicked eyes darted across the room until they landed on the only person who had ever enabled his delusions of grandeur. Vivian. Trent scrambled across the floor on his hands and knees, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his dignity. He crawled toward my mother, his custom silver suit wrinkling and collecting the dust from the floor. He reached her feet and desperately grabbed the hem of her expensive, heavily beaded dress, clinging to it, like a drowning man clutching a life raft. Mom, Trent sobbed, tears and sweat streaming down his face, completely ruining his polished image. Mom, please, you have to talk to her. Vivian looked down at him, her face frozen in a mask of absolute horror and revulsion. The man she had worshipped, the man she had willingly sold my life to protect, was now blubbering at her feet like a pathetic broken child. Make her drop the charges! Trent begged, his voice cracking into a hysterical, high-pitched screech as he yanked on her dress. Tell her to call them off. I can fix this. I swear I can fix this. I will pay it all back, every single cent. I will make it right. Just tell her to stop. Please, Mom, tell her to stop. Vivian stared down at the pathetic, sweating man, clutching the hem of her expensive gown. Disgust warred with raw, unadulterated panic on her aging face. Her eyes darted around the luxurious bridal suite, assessing the devastating debris of the red folders scattered across the carpet. Then her gaze snapped up to meet mine. The cold, mechanical calculation in her eyes was chilling. She was not processing the fact that her golden son-in-law was a common criminal who had stolen millions from the very church we were standing in. She was not concerned about the elderly congregants who had lost their life savings. She was only calculating the blast radius of the impending scandal and how it would affect her social standing. Pick up your phone, Naya, Vivian commanded. Her voice was no longer a shrill, hysterical shriek, but a low, dangerous growl. It was the exact tone she had used when I was a terrified child, the tone that meant absolute obedience was required, or severe unforgiving punishment would immediately follow. Pick up your phone right now and call whoever you need to call to stop this. I looked at her, tilting my head in genuine, profound disbelief. Stop this, I asked, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Vivian, did you not hear a single word I just said? I did not file a noise complaint with the local precinct. I reported a massive multi-million-dollar federal crime. There is no customer service hotline I can call to cancel an FBI raid. I do not care about the technicalities. Vivian snapped violently, pulling her dress from Trent's grasp and stepping over him as if he were a piece of discarded filthy trash. She marched toward me, her eyes blazing with an unholy, desperate fire. You are going to fix this. You are going to call your little computer hacker friends, or the local police chief, or whoever you sent those files to, and you are going to tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them the data was corrupted. Tell them you lied because you were angry. I do not care what unbelievable story you have to invent, but you will stop this investigation immediately. I stood my ground, refusing to shrink away from her imposing figure. You want me to commit perjury to save him? Do you have any idea what this will do to the Washington family name? Vivian hissed, stepping so close I could smell the sharp mint of her breath. Think about the church. We have spent 4 generations building our legacy in Atlanta. We are the pillars of this community. We are Black royalty. If Trent goes down for embezzling church funds, the scandal will destroy us all. We will be social pariahs. The congregation will riot. My friends at the country club will mock us behind our backs. The media will tear our reputation to shreds. I will not allow you to burn down my entire life, to destroy everything I have built, just to settle a petty childhood grudge against your sister. I let out a harsh, dry breath. A petty grudge, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That is what you call this. They literally tried to sell me to a violent, abusive monster to cover up a federal felony, and you are solely worried about your country club friends gossiping about you at brunch. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, letting her see the absolute resolve in my eyes. There is no stopping this, Vivian. The federal government does not care about the Washington family legacy. They do not care about your imported white roses, your expensive caterers, or your perfect Sunday service attendance. The wheels are already in motion. The servers are seized. The warrants are signed. It is completely out of my hands. It is over. Chloe, who had been curled in a pathetic ball against the far wall, suddenly scrambled to her feet. Her heavy bridal makeup was a smeared, horrifying mess of black streaks and pale foundation. "You malicious, jealous witch!" she screamed, the sound tearing violently through her throat. She lunged at me, her face contorted with rage, but my security guards immediately stepped forward, creating an impenetrable wall of muscle between us. She thrashed against them, her perfectly manicured nails clawing uselessly at the air. "You planned this," Chloe sobbed, spitting the words at me. "You waited until my wedding day, until the absolute happiest moment of my entire life, just to destroy it. You could have told us privately. You could have warned us what you found. But no, you wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to ruin my life, because you will never be me." "Warn you?" I asked, my voice cutting through her hysterical sobbing like a surgical blade. "So Trent could shred the physical ledgers, so he could transfer the rest of the stolen money to a non-extradition country and flee the continent." "You are absolutely right, Chloe. I planned every single second of this execution. I smiled at family dinners while you flaunted your stolen wealth. I let you treat me like absolute garbage while I systematically dismantled your entire fraudulent existence piece by piece. And I chose today in this church because I wanted every single person who worships the ground you walk on to see exactly who you really are." I was about to say more, to finally unleash decades of suppressed toxic rage, when a sound echoed through the room that made the blood freeze in everyone's veins. It was not a polite, hesitant knock. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding on the thick oak door of the bridal suite. The sound was so violent, so fiercely demanding, that the heavy wood actually rattled on its brass hinges. Before anyone could even breathe a word, the door burst open. The heavy metal handle slammed against the wall with a deafening crack, fracturing the expensive floral wallpaper. A rush of cold clinical air flooded the stifling perfume-heavy room, followed immediately by 6 imposing figures dressed in dark tactical windbreakers. The bright, bold yellow letters on their backs spelling FBI seemed to glow under the warm vanity lights. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, fanning out across the room and instantly taking control of the entire space. Trenton James Sterling. The lead agent barked, his voice a booming, resonant baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved out of granite. He did not look at the expensive wedding dress, the lavish floral arrangements, or the weeping women. His eyes were locked entirely on the pathetic sweating man kneeling on the floor. Trent let out a sound like a dying, wounded animal. He scrambled backward, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping uselessly on the smooth marble floor. He hit the wall, his hands flying up in a desperate, meaningless gesture of surrender. Wait, please," he stammered, his voice completely giving out, reducing him to a squeak. "There is a terrible mistake. I am a senior partner. I am a highly respected financial manager. You cannot just come in here like this. I have lawyers." "You are under arrest," the lead agent continued, ignoring Trent's frantic babbling entirely. 2 agents immediately stepped forward, grabbing Trent by his biceps and hauling him roughly to his feet. The sudden movement caused the shoulder seam of Trent's expensive custom-tailored suit jacket to tear with a loud rip. "You are being formally charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, the direct embezzlement of institutional funds, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around Trent's wrists echoed through the room louder than a gunshot. It was the definitive sound of reality, finally permanently crashing into the Washington family's carefully constructed delusion. Seeing the cold steel locked around her husband's wrists, seeing her guaranteed future of endless luxury, shopping, country club luncheons, and unearned superiority evaporating before her very eyes, Chloe completely lost her mind. A primal, ear-piercing shriek tore from her throat. She broke free from my security guards and threw herself recklessly at the federal agents. "Let him go!" she screamed. Her face contorted into an unrecognizable, monstrous mask of absolute fury and despair. "You cannot take him. He is my husband. Do you know who we are? We are the Washingtons. You cannot do this to us." She began swinging her arms wildly, her manicured nails raking aggressively across the tactical vest of one of the agents. She clawed at them like a feral cornered cat, kicking her expensive designer heels against their heavy combat boots. "Get your filthy hands off him. Nia, tell them to stop. Tell them you lied. Tell them it is a mistake." The agents did not even flinch. One of them smoothly caught Chloe by the wrists, twisting her arms behind her back with effortless, practiced ease, pinning her securely but carefully against the wall to prevent her from hurting anyone. She thrashed and sobbed, her pristine white gown tearing at the hem, her elaborate bridal updo completely collapsing around her face, sending expensive hairpins clattering to the floor. She looked like a deranged, broken doll. "Take him out!" the lead agent ordered, nodding toward the door. Trent was completely limp, his legs dragging uselessly behind him as the agents hauled him out of the bridal suite and into the long corridor. The heavy door swung shut behind them, cutting off Trent's pathetic, whimpering apologies and the sounds of his complete ruination. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute, broken only by the ragged, jagged sounds of Chloe gasping for air as she slumped to the floor, her cheek pressed against the cold marble. The agent who had restrained her released his grip, gave a curt professional nod to his superior, and exited the room, leaving the 3 of us alone once more in the absolute wreckage of their lives. I slowly turned to look at Vivian. She was standing perfectly still in the center of the room. Her hands were clenched so tightly by her sides that her knuckles were entirely white. The sheer, unadulterated hatred radiating from her eyes was palpable. It was a physical, suffocating force, heavy and toxic. She had watched her empire crumble, her golden son-in-law carried away in chains, her perfect daughter reduced to a screaming, sobbing mess on the floor. And she blamed me for every single second of it. Vivian slowly closed the distance between us. She did not raise her hand. She did not shout. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, vibrating with a deep dark venom that chilled the very air around us. "I am disinheriting you," Vivian whispered, her eyes boring into mine with a murderous intensity. "As of this exact second, you are no longer my daughter. I am stripping your name from every legal document, every trust fund, and every single account tied to the Washington family. I am erasing you completely." She took one final step closer, her face merely inches from mine, her features twisted with absolute malice. "You will never step foot in the Washington family's Buckhead mansion again. You will never attend another family gathering. You will be dead to this family. I am taking everything from you, Nia. You have absolutely nothing." The silence following my mother's declaration was absolute. The room recently filled with the chaotic sounds of federal agents, and Trent's pathetic sobbing now felt as still as a tomb. Vivian stood before me with her chin raised high, breathing heavily through her nose, desperately trying to summon the matriarchal authority that had ruled our family for decades. She looked down at me with a gaze so entirely devoid of maternal affection, it could have frozen water. She genuinely believed her words were the ultimate weapon. In her narrow, status-obsessed mind, being cast out of the Washington family was a fate worse than death. "You think this little stunt changes who we are?" Vivian asked, her voice regaining its smooth, aristocratic cadence as she smoothed the front of her ruined designer gown. "You think sending that useless, incompetent man to federal prison actually hurts me? Trent was a tool, an accessory. He was supposed to be a financial asset, and he turned out to be a liability. We will cut him loose like a diseased limb. We will hire the best public relations firm in Atlanta and spin this entirely to our advantage." She turned her gaze to Chloe, who was still curled on the marble floor, staring vacantly at the doorway where her husband had just been dragged away in handcuffs. "Get up, Chloe," Vivian commanded sharply. "Stop crying. We are Washingtons. We do not weep on the floor like common peasants." Chloe sniffled slowly, pushing herself up until she was leaning heavily against the vanity. She looked at our mother with desperate, hollow eyes, waiting to be told what to do, waiting to be rescued, just as she always had been. "You are going to file for an immediate annulment or a divorce," Vivian instructed, her tone brisk and calculating. "You will be the tragic, deceived victim, the brilliant, beautiful doctor who was financially and emotionally manipulated by a sociopathic fraud. The society columns will eat it up. They will pity you, and then they will revere you for your strength. We will retreat to the estate. We will close the iron gates, refuse all media requests, and weather this storm in the comfort of our own home." Vivian turned back to me, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had found her footing again. She had rebuilt her fortress of delusion right in front of my eyes. "And that is exactly what you will never have," Nia, Vivian sneered, stepping closer so I could see the absolute disgust in her eyes. "You have your little tech company and your new bank accounts, but you have no legacy. You have no bloodline to protect you. You are a classless, treacherous snake who betrayed her own flesh and blood." She gestured broadly around the room as if encompassing the entirety of Atlanta high society. "I am going to leave the Buckhead estate entirely to your sister Vivian," announced, her voice ringing with illusory pride. $10 million of pristine historic real estate, generations of Washington history, the antique imported marble, the sprawling private gardens, the original oil portraits. It is a fortress of true wealth that your new money could never possibly replicate. Chloe will inherit every single square inch of it to rebuild her life. She will host the charity galas. She will sit on the hospital boards. She will carry the Washington name into the next generation. Vivian let out a sharp, mocking breath, looking me up and down with profound pity. "And you will have no one. You will sit in some sterile, lonely penthouse with your computer screens and your millions completely isolated. No one will ever truly love you because you are entirely unlovable. You are toxic. You are a destructive force that ruins everything it touches. You will be a pariah in this city. I will personally make sure that not a single respectable family ever opens their doors to you. You are an outcast. You are homeless, family-less, and completely without a future." I stood perfectly still, letting the full weight of her venomous tirade wash over me. For 30 years, words exactly like these had cut me to the bone, They had kept me awake at night, fueling a desperate, pathetic need to prove my worth to a woman who was physically incapable of loving me. I had bent over backward, shrunk myself down, and handed over my own future just to earn a fraction of the pride she so freely showered upon Chloe. But right now, standing in the wreckage of their lives, her words felt entirely weightless. They were empty, hollow syllables, spoken by a terrified woman clinging to the edge of a sinking ship. I raised my hands, reaching up to the crown of my head. My fingers found the heavy, jeweled combs, securing the elaborate bridal veil. My mother had forced me to wear a veil that was supposed to symbolize my submission to her grand, twisted plan. Slowly, methodically, I pulled the combs free. The heavy silk tulle cascaded down my shoulders and pooled on the marble floor at my feet, pooling like a surrendered white flag. I shook my head, letting my hair fall loose around my bruised face. The physical release of shedding the last piece of their suffocating costume was intoxicating. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The sharp click of my designer heel echoed off the walls, a cold, lethal sound that made Chloe flinch. I took another step, then another, until I was standing toe-to-toe with my mother. "Are you quite finished, Vivian?" I asked, my voice calm, smooth, and entirely devoid of emotion. Vivian glared at me, her chest heaving, refusing to back down. "I have said exactly what needed to be said. You are nothing to us." I smiled. It was a slow, predatory expression that finally made a flicker of genuine uncertainty flash across Vivian's eyes. I looked past her to Chloe, who was gripping the edge of the vanity so tightly her knuckles were white, then brought my gaze back to the matriarch of the Washington family. "You speak so beautifully about legacy." "Vivian," I murmured, keeping my voice low and conversational. "You speak so proudly of the grand Buckhead estate, the imported marble, the sprawling gardens, the $10 million fortress that you believe makes you untouchable. You plan to leave it all to Chloe so she can host her little charity galas and pretend she is not a disgraced, unlicensed medical fraud." I took one final step forward, invading her space, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "Before you start planning Chloe's grand societal comeback, I said every word crisp and lethal. You might want to check your mail. Or perhaps call your real estate attorney, because you are making some incredibly generous promises with property you do not actually possess." Vivian frowned, a deep crease forming between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, though her voice lacked its previous authority. "That house has been in my family for 4 generations. It is paid off. It is fully in my name." I tilted my head, the predatory smile widening. "Is it, Vivian?" I asked softly. "Are you entirely sure you still own that house? Do not play these childish games with me." "Nia," Vivian spat, her voice laced with absolute certainty and condescension. "The deed to the Buckhead estate is locked in my private vault at the bank. It has been there since your grandfather passed. It is untouchable. It is the bedrock of this family, and no amount of your malicious hacking can erase a physical notarized deed." I did not break eye contact. Instead, I let my gaze shift slightly, moving past Vivian's rigid shoulder to look directly at Chloe. My perfect golden sister was leaning heavily against the vanity, her knuckles completely white as she gripped the mahogany edge. The moment I mentioned the house, a terrifying realization had washed over her face. Her breathing had become shallow and erratic. She was looking at me with the wide, desperate eyes of a prey animal caught in a trap it had helped build. "Why do you not ask your golden child how untouchable that house really was?" I suggested, keeping my voice dangerously soft. Vivian frowned, irritation warring with a tiny, unprecedented flicker of doubt. She turned her head sharply to look at her eldest daughter. "Chloe, what is she talking about? Tell your sister to stop speaking this absolute nonsense." Chloe could not form a single word. Her jaw trembled violently and she shook her head back and forth in a frantic, jerky motion. Fresh tears spilled over her ruined makeup, carving dark, muddy tracks down her cheeks. "Speak to me, Chloe," Vivian commanded, her voice rising in pitch. "She cannot speak to you, Vivian, because she knows exactly what I am about to pull out of this bag," I said smoothly. I reached toward the small, heavily beaded bridal clutch resting on the corner of the table. It was the designated emergency bag meant to hold lipstick and breath mints. Instead, I had repurposed it for something much more vital. I unclasped the silver latch and reached inside my fingers, brushing against the crisp, heavy stock paper folded neatly within. I pulled out a thick, legally binding document, unfolding it with deliberate, unhurried precision. I held the paper up so the harsh vanity lights illuminated the embossed seal at the bottom. 6 months ago, I began my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority in the quiet room. Your perfect daughter and her brilliant Wall Street husband found themselves in a massive, unmanageable financial crisis. Trent's aggressive crypto gambling had wiped out their personal savings long before he ever decided to raid the church's pension fund. He was desperate. He was drowning in margin calls and offshore debts. He needed a massive immediate influx of cash just to keep his creditors from breaking his kneecaps. Vivian stared at the document in my hand, her eyes darting across the heavy black text, trying to process words that her brain refused to accept. They needed capital. I continued taking a slow step toward my mother. And what was the largest, most liquid asset readily available to them? The untouchable Washington family estate. That is impossible! Vivian gasped, taking a sudden step backward, as if the paper in my hand were physically burning her. She shook her head, her perfectly styled hair finally losing its rigid shape. I never signed anything. I would never authorize a mortgage on that property. It is our legacy. You did not have to sign anything. I corrected her, my tone devoid of any sympathy. You gave Trent full comprehensive power of attorney over your financial estate 3 years ago because you believed he was a financial genius. You bragged about it at the country club. You handed him the keys to the kingdom. He used that power to leverage the Buckhead mansion to the absolute limit. He took out a massive high-interest second mortgage against the property to cover his gambling debts. Vivian's entire body went rigid. The air seemed to leave her lungs in a single painful rush. She slowly turned her head back to Chloe. The look on her face was no longer just anger. It was the devastating, world-shattering realization of absolute betrayal. Chloe. Vivian whispered, her voice cracking, making her sound small and incredibly old. Tell me this is a lie. Tell me you did not let him put our home, our entire history up for collateral. Chloe let out a pathetic, high-pitched sob. He told me it was just temporary, she wailed, covering her face with her trembling hands. He told me it was a bridge loan. He said his investments were going to double in a month, and he would pay it right back before you ever noticed. He promised me, Mom. He promised. You fool! Vivian shrieked, the sound tearing violently through the room. She lunged toward Chloe, her hands raised as if she might actually strike her golden child, but she stopped halfway, her body trembling with uncontainable rage. You stupid, arrogant, careless little fool! You risked our entire legacy for a bridge loan! Vivian spun back to me, her chest heaving, desperately trying to regain her footing. She squared her shoulders, summoning a fractured, desperate version of her usual commanding presence. Fine, Vivian spat, her voice shaking violently. Fine, he made a terrible, illegal mistake. But it does not matter. I have liquid assets. I have offshore trust accounts. I will call the bank president right now. I will wire the funds, pay off the mortgage, and clear the debt today. The house is not lost. It is entirely too late for that, Vivian, I said, bringing her desperate rationalizations to a grinding, permanent halt. I took the legal document and tossed it onto the vanity table right in front of Chloe's trembling hands. It landed with a definitive heavy smack. Trent did not just take out a mortgage, I explained, watching the last remaining shreds of color drain from my mother's face. He defaulted on it. He missed 4 consecutive payments. The bank quietly initiated foreclosure proceedings 30 days ago. They were preparing to put the Washington family legacy on the public auction block. It would have been the biggest scandal in Atlanta real estate history. Vivian brought a hand to her chest, her fingers digging into the heavy silk of her gown. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide and unfocused. No, she gasped. No, I will buy it back. I will outbid anyone. I will— You cannot buy it back! I interrupted, my voice cutting through her panic with absolute lethal precision. Because it never went to public auction. The bank did not want the bad publicity of foreclosing on a prominent church figure. So they sold the bad debt in a private portfolio package to a highly aggressive, deeply capitalized private equity firm, a holding company named Vanguard. Vivian blinked her mind, completely failing to process the corporate terminology. Vanguard. She repeated the word, sounding foreign and meaningless on her tongue. I do not care who they are. I will call their CEO. I will write them a check right now. I will pay double what they paid for the debt. Give me their contact information. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch out, allowing the tension to build until the air in the bridal suite felt thick enough to shatter. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was nothing. I looked at the sister who had stood by and smiled while I was treated like a burden. Vanguard is not just a random private equity firm, Vivian, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper. Vanguard is the corporate umbrella for my cybersecurity holding company. Vivian froze. Her eyes widened, her mouth falling open as her brain desperately tried to connect the impossible dots I had just laid out before her. You see, I continued, taking one final, deliberate step toward her, forcing her to look up into my eyes. While Trent was busy playing with digital pennies and stealing from church custodians, I was building actual proprietary defense architecture. Last Friday, after months of federal review, the United States Department of Defense finalized the acquisition of my core security software. I paused, letting a razor-sharp, victorious smile spread across my face. The cash payout was $150 million. Chloe let out a choked, terrified gasp, sliding down the front of the vanity until she collapsed entirely on the floor, her lavish wedding gown pooling around her in a ruined, wrinkled mess. Vivian looked as though she had been physically struck by a heavy blow. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to reach out and grab the back of a velvet armchair just to keep herself standing. 150 million, she whispered, the number echoing in her mind, like a death knell to her entire worldview. Vanguard did not just buy your bad debt, Vivian, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. Vanguard executed the foreclosure. The paperwork cleared yesterday afternoon while you were busy fussing over floral arrangements and seating charts. I pointed a steady, unyielding finger directly at the document resting on the table. That is not a mortgage statement. That is the new deed of ownership. The Buckhead mansion does not belong to the Washington family anymore, Vivian. It belongs entirely, legally, and permanently to me. And as the sole legal owner of that property, I have already instructed my private security team to change every single lock on the estate. Vivian stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, unable to form a single cohesive thought. The empire she had lorded over me, the legacy she had just used to threaten me with exile, was gone. It had been dismantled and purchased by the very daughter she had deemed a worthless disappointment. You have until tomorrow morning to remove your personal belongings, I told her, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable finality. After that, anything left inside my house will be thrown into the street. The words hung in the quiet air of the bridal suite, sharp and definitive. The absolute reality of the situation struck Vivian with the concussive force of a sledgehammer. I could literally see the gears in her mind breaking, snapping under the weight of a truth she was entirely incapable of processing. The daughter she had discarded like garbage, the child she had verbally and emotionally trampled upon, the girl she had forced out of her home and treated as a humiliating stain on their perfect pedigree, was now standing before her as a billionaire. I was not just wealthy. I was their sole, undisputed creditor. I held the very roof over their heads, the epicenter of their ridiculous social pride in the palm of my hand. Vivian's perfectly maintained posture, the rigid spine that had intimidated Atlanta high society for decades, completely collapsed. The strength vanished from her legs. She let out a short, breathy gasp as her knees buckled. She did not gracefully sit into the velvet armchair behind her. Instead, she slid down its side, her heavy beaded gown pooling around her, as she hit the cold marble floor. The proud, tyrannical matriarch of the Washington family was instantly reduced to a heap of trembling silk and shattered pride. A few feet away, Chloe remained completely paralyzed. The golden child, the flawless, pampered princess who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was shaking so violently her teeth audibly chattered. She could not form a single syllable. Her mind, accustomed only to privilege protection and guaranteed success entirely, short-circuited in the face of absolute ruin. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, looking at me not as a sister, but as an executioner. She realized she had absolutely nothing left. Her husband was in federal custody, her wealth was a criminal illusion, and her childhood home belonged to the sister she had relentlessly tormented. I stood perfectly still, watching them process their destruction. Vivian looked up at me from the floor. Her eyes, usually so cold, harsh, and calculating, were now swimming with frantic, desperate tears. The venomous anger she had wielded just moments ago evaporated instantly, replaced by the pathetic, groveling desperation of a woman who had just realized her survival depended entirely on the mercy of the person she had abused the most. Her survival instinct kicked in, overriding her pride. She resorted to the only weapon she had left in her arsenal, a grotesque, sickeningly transparent pantomime of maternal love. "Nia." Vivian breathed, her voice cracking into a high, shaky whisper. "Nia, please. You cannot do this. You cannot throw us out on the street. We are your family. I am your mother." She reached out her manicured hand, trembling violently as she extended it toward the hem of my dress, mirroring the exact pathetic gesture Trent had made to her just 10 minutes prior. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, keeping my dress far out of her reach. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," Vivian stammered, fresh tears spilling over her lashes and ruining her impeccable, expensive makeup. "We can fix this. You are my daughter. My brilliant, successful daughter. I am so incredibly proud of you, Nia. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. I always told everyone how smart you were." The sheer audacity of her lies was almost fascinating to witness. She was rewriting 30 years of history in 30 seconds, frantically trying to build a bridge over the chasm she had spent my entire life digging. "Please, my sweet girl," Vivian begged, her voice rising into a pathetic whine. "Let us talk about this. Let us go home to our house, to your house, and work this out as a family. We can start over. I will make everything right. Just please do not do this to us. You are a Washington. You are my beautiful daughter." I looked down at the woman weeping on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no warmth. I felt nothing but the clean, cold clarity of justice. I slowly raised my hand, holding my palm out to cut off her frantic, babbling pleas. The movement was simple, but it carried an authority that immediately silenced her. "Do not call me your daughter," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute finality. "From the moment you watched me get beaten and only cared about your reputation, I have been an orphan." Vivian stood completely paralyzed. The words "my house" seemed to physically strike her, snapping her neck back as if she had taken a direct, violent blow to the jaw. For a woman whose entire identity, social standing, and terrifying ego were woven intricately into the fabric of that $10 million estate, the reality of losing it to the daughter she despised was a fatal psychological wound. She opened her mouth to argue, to issue another empty, commanding threat, but her vocal cords completely refused to cooperate. A wet, pathetic wheeze was the only sound she could produce as her chest heaved under her heavy designer silk. Chloe, still a crumpled heap of white tulle and smeared makeup on the floor, suddenly scrambled forward on her hands and knees. She clawed frantically at the skirt of my gown, her face streaked with black mascara and ruined foundation. "You cannot do this to me, Nia," she begged, her voice a ragged, hysterical shriek that echoed off the high vaulted ceiling of the bridal suite. "Trent is going to federal prison. My entire wedding is ruined. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to live? I have absolutely no money. Trent managed all the accounts. He bought my car. He bought my rings. He paid for the honeymoon. You cannot put me on the street. I am your sister. You have to let me stay in the house." I looked down at the woman who had spent 30 years making sure I knew I was inferior. The woman who had smirked while Trent insulted my career. The woman who had gleefully participated in my daily humiliation. I slowly stepped back, pulling my expensive dress free from her desperate, clutching grasp. Nothing. Trent bought you actually belongs to you, Chloe, I corrected her, my tone completely devoid of any familial warmth or sympathy. It was all purchased with stolen, embezzled funds. The federal government will be seizing your cars, your jewelry, and whatever remains in your joint bank accounts before the sun goes down today. You are a liability tied to a massive federal fraud case. I shifted my gaze back to Vivian, who was now clutching the edge of the velvet armchair, her knuckles white, her face a sickly shade of gray. My legal team is extremely punctual, Vivian, I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute, unyielding authority. My lead attorney will personally deliver the formal eviction notice to the Buckhead estate at exactly 8 in the morning. You and your golden child will have exactly 24 hours from that moment to pack whatever personal non-fixture items you can physically carry. Anything remaining on the property at 8 in the morning the following day will be loaded into industrial dumpsters and hauled directly to the city landfill by my private contractors. Vivian swayed violently, her hand flying to her throat as she struggled to pull air into her constricting lungs. "You are a monster!" She gasped out, the venom in her voice, severely diluted by her undeniable, suffocating terror. "You are a cold, heartless, vindictive monster. We have absolutely nothing left. You are leaving your own mother with nothing." I tilted my head, studying her ruined, panicked expression with analytical precision. "That is correct, Vivian," I replied, my tone conversational and incredibly light. "You have absolutely nothing. You trusted a sociopathic fraud because he wore a nice suit and looked the part, and you violently alienated the one person who could have actually protected your legacy. So I genuinely wish you the absolute best of luck trying to find a top-tier federal defense attorney for Trent with empty pockets and frozen assets. I hear the public defenders in this district are severely overworked, but I am sure they will do their absolute best to keep him out of a maximum security facility." I did not wait for another hysterical outburst. I did not wait for Vivian to drop to her knees or for Chloe to start pulling her own hair out in a blind panic. I had delivered the final crushing blow, and there was nothing left to say. I simply turned my back on the two women who had made my life a living nightmare and walked away. I pushed the heavy oak door of the bridal suite open and stepped out into the long, vaulted corridor of the megachurch. The contrast was immediate and jarring. Inside that room was the suffocating, desperate stench of defeat, panic, and ruin. Out here, the air was cool, crisp, and clean. My footsteps echoed rhythmically against the polished stone floor, a steady, powerful beat that signaled the absolute end of a very long, very bitter war. As I walked toward the main foyer, I could see the absolute chaos Trent's arrest had caused rippling through the venue. The massive sanctuary designed to hold thousands of Atlanta's elite was completely empty of wedding guests. The elaborate, towering floral arches were knocked askew. The velvet ropes were trampled and discarded. The string quartet was hurriedly packing away their instruments in the corner, casting nervous glances toward the administrative wing. Federal agents were still moving methodically through the church offices down the hall, carrying out sealed, heavily taped boxes of servers, hard drives, and physical financial records. The illusion of the Washington family's wholly untouchable empire had been violently ripped down right in the middle of the sanctuary. I walked past the grand reception hall, noting the towering 5-tier wedding cake standing untouched in the center of the room, surrounded by abandoned glasses of warm champagne. It was a monument to a spectacular public failure. A few church elders stood huddled near the vestibule, watching the federal agents work. When they saw me approach, their panicked conversations immediately stopped. These were the men who had secretly hired my firm, the men who knew exactly what I had just done to save their congregation from total financial ruin. They parted silently, clearing a wide path for me, offering small, deeply respectful nods of gratitude as I passed. I returned the gesture with a brief dip of my chin, acknowledging the successful completion of my contract. I reached the massive, intricately carved wooden front doors of the church. 2 federal agents standing guard by the exit glanced at me, noting my calm, unbothered demeanor, and immediately stepped aside to pull the heavy doors open. The moment the heavy wood swung outward, a blinding, chaotic explosion of white light hit me. The local and national press had descended upon the church with terrifying, coordinated speed. News of a high-profile FBI raid at the city's wealthiest megachurch, combined with the spectacular on-site arrest of a prominent Wall Street executive on his wedding day, was the ultimate media goldmine. Dozens of reporters, cameramen, and local news anchors swarmed the marble steps, pushing aggressively against a quickly assembled police barricade. Camera flashes fired in rapid, blinding succession, turning the dim afternoon into strobe-lit daylight. Microphones bearing the logos of every major news network in the state were thrust in my direction over the heads of the struggling police officers. The noise was deafening, a roaring wall of frantic, overlapping questions. "Nia, is it true your brother-in-law embezzled millions from the pension fund?" A reporter shouted, his voice cutting sharply through the deafening roar of the crowd. "Where is Chloe Washington?" a woman screamed from the left, waving a digital recorder. "Did your mother know about the Cayman Islands shell accounts? Is the family filing for immediate bankruptcy? Is the wedding officially canceled?" Another voice hollered over the chaos. I did not flinch. I did not cover my face, duck my head, or rush down the stairs like a guilty, humiliated associate of a fallen, disgraced empire. I stood tall at the top of the marble steps, my shoulders squared, my posture impeccable. I let the flashing cameras capture every angle of my perfectly composed, entirely unbothered expression. Let them take the pictures. Let them document the exact, precise moment the Washington family hierarchy was permanently, violently rewritten for the entire world to see. I walked down the marble steps with measured, graceful strides. A path naturally cleared as a massive, immaculate black Rolls-Royce glided smoothly up to the curb, its heavily tinted windows gleaming under the aggressive camera flashes. My personal driver, a towering man in a sharp, tailored black suit, immediately stepped out and pulled the heavy rear door open for me, standing as a physical shield between me and the shouting paparazzi. I paused just before stepping into the luxurious, leather-scented interior of the vehicle. I rested my hand lightly on the doorframe and looked back at the imposing facade of the church. For a fraction of a second, the overwhelming, frantic noise of the media circus seemed to fade into a dull, distant hum. I thought about Vivian and Chloe still trapped inside that stifling, ruined bridal suite. They were currently surrounded by the physical wreckage of their destroyed reputation, desperately trying to comprehend a harsh new reality where they were no longer royalty, but beggars. They had spent months meticulously, arrogantly planning this exact day to be the ultimate showcase of their superiority, their wealth, and their untouchable status. They had intended to use this lavish, multi-million-dollar wedding to cement their golden pedestal forever, forcing me to stand in the background as a prop for their greatness. Instead, it had become the exact stage for their total, inescapable annihilation. The poetic justice of their absolute collapse happening on what was supposed to be their most glorious, triumphant day was a masterpiece of fate that no amount of money could ever buy. I stepped into the back of the Rolls-Royce, sliding gracefully onto the premium leather seat. My driver firmly shut the heavy door, instantly cutting off the shouts and flashing lights of the media outside, plunging the cabin into a serene, perfect quiet. As the massive engine purred to life and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, I looked straight ahead. I did not turn around. I did not cast a single glance back at the church, the flashing cameras, or the shattered remnants of the family I was finally, permanently leaving behind. The plush leather seats of the Rolls-Royce embraced me as we pulled away from the chaos, the frantic shouts of the paparazzi fading into a dull, distant hum. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythmic, powerful hum of the engine, feeling a profound, absolute silence settle into my very bones. It was the sound of true, unadulterated freedom. 6 months have passed since that spectacular afternoon at the church. I stand now by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretch out for miles, a sea of diamonds sparkling against the velvet dark of the night. I swirl the deep red Cabernet in my crystal glass, the reflection of the city catching in the crimson liquid. The air up here is perfectly still, perfectly mine. Vanguard continues to expand globally, our valuation doubling after the Department of Defense contract went public. But tonight, My mind is not on corporate acquisitions or global markets. I take a slow sip of wine, letting the warmth spread through my chest as I reflect on the exquisite, absolute precision of karma. Trent is currently residing in a federal correctional facility in upstate New York. The arrogant, slick-talking financial wizard who once sneered at my coding skills from behind his expensive tailored suits is now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The federal judge did not share Vivian's delusional belief in Trent's financial genius. The embezzlement from the church pension fund, combined with the massive wire fraud tied to his offshore cryptocurrency accounts, earned him a mandatory sentence of 8 years without the possibility of early parole. I received a brief panicked letter from him during his first week of incarceration, begging me to use my newfound wealth to hire a high-powered appellate lawyer. He promised to pay me back with interest. I fed the letter directly into my paper shredder without bothering to read past the first paragraph. He is learning the hard way that there are no margin calls or bridge loans in a maximum security prison, only the cold, harsh reality of his own catastrophic choices, his partner in crime. Marcus did not fare much better. When the FBI raided the church offices, they uncovered a labyrinth of kickbacks and fraudulent shell companies that Marcus had helped establish to funnel the stolen money. The resulting scandal triggered an immediate, ruthless audit of his own private medical practice. Unsurprisingly, the auditors found years of systematic Medicare fraud and illegal billing practices. The medical board permanently revoked his license before the criminal charges were even officially filed. Marcus was forced to declare immediate catastrophic bankruptcy to avoid asset seizure, but it was a futile gesture. The federal government froze every account attached to his name. He is currently awaiting trial while confined to a small state-mandated halfway house stripped of his medical credentials, his wealth, and his precious societal standing. But the most profound poetic justice belongs to Vivian and Chloe. True to my word, my legal team delivered the eviction notice at exactly 8 in the morning, the day following the ruined wedding. The local news crews were tipped off, capturing high-definition footage of the Great Washington matriarch hauling garbage bags full of designer clothes onto the pristine driveway of the Buckhead estate. Because Trent had leveraged absolutely everything, their personal accounts were seized by the feds. Vivian's offshore trusts, the ones she bragged would save them, were flagged as accessories to federal wire fraud and immediately frozen by the authorities. They were forced to abandon the imported marble, the sprawling private gardens, and the generations of manufactured legacy. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying, utterly unremarkable suburb 30 miles outside the city perimeter. There are no iron gates to protect them. There are no charity galas, no hospital board meetings, no society columns waiting to praise their resilience. Vivian spends her days sitting in a cheap vinyl armchair, frantically calling old country club acquaintances who instantly send her directly to voicemail. She is a pariah, exactly as she once threatened I would be. The elite society she worshipped excised her like a diseased limb the moment her wealth evaporated. Chloe's reality is perhaps the most shattering. Her fraudulent, unlicensed medical consulting business was thoroughly investigated and permanently dismantled by the state health board. Stripped of the Washington name's protection and barred from ever working in the medical field again, she was forced to face the real world without a safety net. The woman who once stood in my bedroom and mocked my career as a tedious little hobby is now working the morning shift as a cashier at a discount pharmacy. I am told she wears a heavy, oversized visor to hide her face from customers, terrified that someone from her former elite circle might recognize her ringing up breath mints and paper towels. I turn away from the window, walking across the imported hardwood floors of my living room. The penthouse is quiet, but it is not lonely. It is filled with the peace that comes from absolute self-reliance. I did not destroy my family. I simply stopped being the foundation that held up their toxic parasitic empire. I let them collapse under the weight of their own greed, arrogance, and profound cruelty. I set my wine glass down on the sleek black marble counter of my kitchen. Tomorrow, I have a board meeting to finalize the acquisition of a European cybersecurity firm. I have a mentorship program to launch for young women entering the tech industry. I have a life built entirely on my own merit, a fortress of true independence that no one can ever take from me. The Washington legacy did not end in ruin. It was simply inherited by the only daughter strong enough to actually build one. I traced the delicate rim of my crystal wineglass, letting the profound absolute silence of the penthouse wash over me. It is a specific kind of silence, the kind that only exists when the deafening lifelong noise of someone else's expectations has finally been extinguished. For 30 years, my mind was cluttered with Vivian's harsh critiques, Chloe's condescending laughter, and the suffocating pressure of a family legacy that demanded my subservience but fiercely denied my participation. Tonight, that noise is completely gone. It has been replaced by the quiet, steady hum of the city below and the rhythmic beating of my own liberated heart. I take a slow sip of the Cabernet, savoring the rich, complex notes. It tastes like victory. It tastes like a future that belongs entirely to me. For so long, I believed the societal lie that blood dictates loyalty. We are conditioned from birth to forgive the unforgivable simply because the people holding the knife share our DNA. We are told to keep the peace, to turn the other cheek, to accept emotional scraps from the table because family is supposed to be forever. I spent my entire youth contorting myself into agonizing shapes, shrinking my intellect and dimming my own light, just hoping to earn a fraction of the maternal love Vivian showered upon Chloe. I thought if I achieved enough, if I became successful enough, the matriarch of the Washington family would finally see me as an equal. But toxic people do not recognize equality. They only recognize hierarchy. They view independence as a threat and intelligence as a weapon aimed directly at their fragile egos. Vivian did not hate me because I was a failure. She hated me because I possessed the one thing she could never buy: control or replicate: absolute self-sufficiency. Chloe was the perfect golden child because she was entirely hollow. She was a beautiful decorative vessel, waiting to be filled with Vivian's ambitions and Trent's stolen money. She traded her autonomy for a velvet-lined cage, mistaking pampered captivity for genuine love. And when the door of that cage was ripped open by federal agents, she had absolutely no survival skills. They were a fragile house of cards, held together by generational delusion, carefully maintained lies, and aggressive entitlement. I did not knock their house down. That is the most beautiful poetic realization of this entire ordeal. I did not have to plant the seeds of their destruction. Trent's insatiable, reckless greed, Marcus's blinding arrogance, Vivian's shallow obsession with status, and Chloe's willful, pampered ignorance. Those were the seeds. They planted them, deep-watered them with deceit, and cultivated them for years. I merely purchased the land, provided the sunlight, and watched them harvest the catastrophic consequences of their own making. True power is not loud. It is not found in screaming matches in a bridal suite or in desperate groveling pleas on a marble floor. True power is mathematical. It is cold, precise, and unyielding. It is the simple, devastating application of absolute truth against a fortress of lies. When you remove the emotional leverage that toxic people rely on, they immediately collapse under the weight of their own incompetence. I walk slowly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that span the entire length of my living room. Atlanta stretches out before me, a sprawling grid of golden streetlights and towering glass skyscrapers. Millions of people are down there living their lives, fighting their own battles, entirely unaware of the empire that crumbled today and the new one that has officially taken its place. I look at my faint reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me is no longer the bruised, exhausted scapegoat desperately seeking validation from a mother incapable of giving it. She is a founder. She is a CEO. She is a woman who built a $150 million fortress with her own two hands, typing lines of code in the dark, while the rest of her family slept soundly in their stolen luxury. I am exactly who I was always meant to be, and I did it entirely without them. I will never return to the Buckhead estate. The $10 million mansion that Vivian wielded over my head like an executioner's axe holds absolutely no sentimental value to me. It is just another asset in Vanguard's vast growing portfolio. I have already instructed my wealth management team to completely strip the property. The antique imported marble will be torn out. The sprawling private gardens will be leveled. The historic oil portraits of the Washington ancestors will be boxed up and shoved into a climate-controlled storage unit. I am going to have the entire estate bulldozed to the ground, erasing the physical epicenter of my mother's tyranny from the map. In its place, I am funding the construction of a state-of-the-art STEM academy for underprivileged girls. A place where young women will be taught how to build their own empires rather than being groomed to marry into them. The Washington legacy is dead. The Vanguard legacy has officially begun. I raise my crystal glass, holding the deep red vintage up to the glittering backdrop of the city lights. I look directly forward, my gaze piercing through the reflection in the glass, addressing the void, addressing the past, and addressing anyone who has ever been made to feel small, worthless, or invisible by the very people who were supposed to protect them. People always say that the best revenge is living well. I say, my voice steady, smooth, and echoing with absolute, undeniable authority in the quiet penthouse. And there is a certain quiet truth to that. I swirl the wine, a slow, predatory smile curving the corners of my lips as I deliver the final defining verdict of my life. But I have found that the absolute greatest, most exquisite revenge is simply letting toxic people dig their own graves while you quietly buy the land they are digging it on. I raise the glass, one final inch a toast to the magnificent, unburdened future. Cheers to freedom. I take a slow, satisfying sip of the wine. Lowering the glass, I turn my back to the camera, walking with measured, powerful strides toward the brilliant, glowing lights of the city skyline. The heavy silk of my gown sweeps across the polished floor, a shadow moving effortlessly into the vibrant electric light. I do not look back. I step fully into the brilliance of my own making, and the screen cuts to absolute black.